This Sunday on Capital Connection, get comfortable, Illinois. We're staying home until April 30th.
We need to maintain our course and keep working to flatten the curve.
Why Governor Pritzker and state public health experts advised against reopening the state before the end of the month.
Extending the stay-at-home order is key to reducing the spread of the virus and the number of people who become ill.
And
with this virus, we are in unprecedented times.
Congressman Rodney Davis joins us remotely from his home in Taylorville, not far from where a cluster of the coronavirus broke out in a senior living facility. And with the order to stay at home now extending through April 30th and a budget deadline around the corner on May 31st, will the Senate and House come back to action or work remotely? Senate President Don Harmon joins us.
We won't be back unless there is something important and urgent.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell, reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, April 5th. Brace yourselves. The stay-at-home is going to last much longer than we first hoped. Governor Pritzker's executive order requiring Illinois citizens to remain at home was supposed to expire just 2 days from now, on Tuesday. But instead, on Wednesday of this week, the governor extended that order to last all the way throughout the entire month of April.
Folks, I know that this journey is an extraordinarily difficult one. Our greatest risk of hitting capacity isn't right now, but weeks from now. The virus's spread is growing. I joined Republican and Democratic governors in asking the federal government to open a special enrollment period of the Affordable Care Act to expand health care access to Americans during this period of unprecedented health challenges.
We're joined now remotely via Zoom interview by Congressman Rodney Davis. The numbers from the Labor Department are pretty staggering. We saw this Thursday 6.6 million Americans file for unemployment in addition to the 3.3 million from the week before. We've also seen some top economists and very widely respected economists project that the number of Americans seeking unemployment could reach 20 million. Just an unfathomable number, hard to imagine. The situation on the unemployment line does seem grim. I want to ask you, though, about this bipartisan effort we've seen from Democratic and Republican governors alike to say as these 9 to potentially 20 million Americans suddenly have lost their job, lost their paychecks, many of them may be losing their health insurance. There's already a lot of Americans who are uninsured. These governors have called on the Trump administration to expand access, this emergency access for an enrollment period to get on Obamacare, to get on the Affordable Care Act exchange, and to make sure they have health insurance. Do you support that call on the Trump administration to use this emergency proclamation to allow them to expand enrollment for the ACA?
Well, I'll let the Trump administration decide what they're going to do when it comes to the ACA. But what I can tell you is my job has been to work in a very bipartisan way to make sure that we did everything we could to encourage these individuals from having to go on unemployment. That's why you're seeing a loan program that's going to have the first ever forgiveness through the Small Business Administration, working through our local financial institutions, our banks, our credit unions, to ensure that individuals, those mom and pop shops, remember, the impact of what we've seen in our economy is really unprecedented in our nation's history. 4 weeks ago, we were in an economy that everybody running for office promised we would get to. We promised we would have, if you just elected us, we would help us get to sustained historic low unemployment. We were there less than a month ago. And then this virus hit, and it turned our economy upside down. But you can see the devastation in our squares and our downtowns in so many communities that I serve in central and southwestern Illinois, that we want to make sure that we provide a bridge fund. And that's what this SBA fund will do, Mark. It will allow for our small businesses to get access to the cash flow to keep people on. And they're incentivized to pay for health care. They're incentivized to pay for payroll and their daily expenses, because for the first time in my career working for the federal government, or being a part of the federal government as I am now. First time I've ever seen a possible loan forgiveness program to small businesses that really focused on our mom and pop shops.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're highlighting the connection between employers and their workers, and that health insurance access that they have there. But I think something like 1 in 5 people in Illinois are a part of the gig economy, where they're contractors. There is special relief for them set aside for 39 weeks, I believe, of unemployment benefits through this relief package that Congress just pushed through. But what is a person like that, maybe a constituent of yours, supposed to do? Or a person who comes to you and says, Congressman, I'm uninsured, I don't have health insurance during this time, I'm worried about the coronavirus, where do I go to get insurance? Would you recommend that person I mean, they can't enroll in Obamacare right now unless there's this expanded enrollment. Should that person have that option?
Well, not everybody in the gig economy who are self-employed are going through the Obamacare exchanges. There are other ways that they're getting health care coverage to begin with. And as a matter of fact, though, our health care system, I'm glad you brought it up, it's still broken, Mark. You know, we had Democrats run a campaign in 2018 promising to fix our broken health care system that has left 60 million Americans behind. We have 60 million Americans that still don't have health care coverage, and we have and part of that 60 million are people that have coverage that they can't afford to use if they were diagnosed with a pre-existing condition, for that matter. That's a problem. We were promised that this fix was coming. And before this coronavirus, in the midst of the best economy that we've had in my lifetime, we still didn't see a solution to fix the broken healthcare promise that had been made to these 60 million Americans by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats who were given control of the House. Remember, we had our plan that we showed was going to lower premiums and still provide the coverage for pre-existing conditions, but it failed by 1 vote in the Senate during the last Congress. It's up to the majority right now to offer their solution. And I'll work with the administration to make sure that we continue to do things like have already been done by the Trump administration. This administration has already increased the Medicaid match by 6.2% for every single state in the nation. That's a huge increase in reimbursements coming from the federal government to the state-run Medicaid program. Now it's up to our governor, it's up to our state officials to make sure they use that 6.2% to benefit those who need coverage, who are on Medicaid the most, and get them access to the care that they need that they still don't have in many cases.
With respect to all of that political debate and process and how we got here, I wonder if any of that has changed for you in this time of crisis, in this time of pandemic, when people's lives are at risk, and even national public health experts are projecting 80 to 240,000 lives may be lost in the very near term here. Should those uninsured people, would you ask President Trump or ask his administration for this emergency, to expand access for enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act? Should uninsured people be allowed a one-time emergency choke point through which they could access health insurance?
Well, I certainly want to make sure that we get everybody covered that we can. But that doesn't mean having an access to sign up for a plan that you can't afford to use is something that many constituents are going to take advantage of. And that's where the politics comes into play, Mark. I know many Democrats are calling for an open enrollment period, and frankly,
and Republican governors.
There are many cases where there's an open enrollment period in many types of healthcare plans that go beyond certain situations and beyond certain guidelines. Now, we certainly want the governors to have the flexibility to implement Medicaid programs as they see fit, and that was really part of our solution that we tried to put in place that was opposed by every Democrat in the House during the last Congress. I want to see bipartisan solutions. And if this was a solution that we could have solved legislatively, I wish our leaders on both sides would have been able to address it in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 of this debate.
It's interesting how our priorities realign when people's lives are in danger. And it gives us an interesting case study at the current American healthcare system now, when President Trump is saying, let's use the Defense Production Act to eliminate price gouging. He wants the Attorney General to make sure that companies are not trying to seek profit over people's lives, and that he's trying to as governors plead with him, he's trying to get to a point where he helps states not compete against each other for the same thing. I mean, we're seeing that in the pharmaceutical industry. We're seeing what other lessons might we learn about what's fair in a marketplace when people's lives are on the line from this coronavirus example? Are there any lessons moving forward about the future of the American healthcare system that we can extrapolate from this time?
Yeah, very much so. There are plenty of lessons. And the time for that Monday morning quarterbacking is after this is over. I don't want to criticize the federal government's response. I don't want to criticize the state government's response or the local government's response right now. I want to say thank you for the efforts that are being put forth. And also thank you at all levels for making sure that when the ground changes, when the opportunities in front of us change, the opportunities for better testing modalities, the opportunities to get answers to our prospective patients faster change, that I'm glad that the federal government, state government, local government are doing what they can to adapt to those changes. But as we see this move forward, we've got to look at what didn't we do. Clearly, no level of government, no country as a whole was prepared for this pandemic. We need to do better. We need to have a better assessment of what a stockpile should look like of personal protective equipment. We need to have a better idea of a plan of action to implement if another pandemic hits the United States of America. When you look at a country like South Korea, they're held up as one of the shining stars in this fight against COVID-19. Keep in mind, they were hit very hard with SARS not too long ago. So they had the ability to plan ahead. They had more test kits available for their citizens. They had more supplies and PPE available, and they were able to get a handle on the spread of COVID-19 faster than most countries. We need to take a lesson from them and take a step back after this is over, have somewhat of a 9/11 commission. Let's make sure that we put in place better emergency procedures all across the board.
Some of those warnings, yes,
for decades.
Failures for decades. So it sounds like you're saying that the warnings went unheeded even before the Trump administration, because the warnings were there that a pandemic could be coming as far back as November, December. The intelligence was coming across President Trump's desk saying, we think this pandemic is real, and he really downplayed it until early March.
Well, a lot of people downplayed it. I mean, folks here in the United States at all levels, and you can go back and find even the experts like Dr. Fauci talking about how this might not have as much of an impact here in the United States. I think everybody was hoping that this would be like SARS and this would be like H1N1 and Ebola, where there were limited effects on the United States and our citizenry. Well, we didn't dodge the bullet this time. We got hit, and we got hit hard. And I think now the time for learning lessons is after we conquer this virus, after we become the leading expert in fighting the coronavirus, which we will do here at the United States of America. We've invested $400 million in trials for a vaccine. We will come up with this vaccine. We will make sure that we continue to eradicate coronavirus or COVID-19 from the rest of the globe. But we've got to make sure we invest. You know, for those politicians who have served in Congress or in the state houses or in local levels a lot longer than I have, we all have to take a step back and take responsibility for not doing enough to prepare for this pandemic. And we all ought to put the political hats aside, and we all ought to sit down, come up with a good plan for the future, and make sure that we're ready for the next time. Because you know what, Mark? There will be a next time.
All right, Congressman Rodney Davis joining us again from his home in Taylorville. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you back in person on set in the near future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
We're back in a moment with Senate President Don Harmon. Stick around.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Senate President Don Harmon joins us now remotely from his district office in Oak Park. So Governor Pritzker's latest executive order pushes the stay-at-home order back to April 30th. He used the full weight of the executive power, every ounce that he had every day. He only has 30 days at a time for these disaster proclamations. He used all 30 of them. That means, are we looking at the soonest? The legislature might return being May 1st, because I don't get the sense from people I've talked to that the Senate right now feels confident and has the legal authority to do remote legislation?
We're exploring that. We have not landed on a conclusive theory. And again, it's not just the Senate. I'd have to work with my colleagues, both Senator Brady in the Senate to confirm our position, but also Speaker Madigan and Leader Durkin. And the governor would have to be involved. So I'm hoping that there's a path. I'm loath to bring our members back into real session, given the very real health threats, not only to the members and their families, but also to our staff. So we'll navigate that when we can, but we won't be back unless there is something important and urgent, but we won't shirk our responsibility either.
At the start of session, you were one of many voices saying that ethical reform needed to be at the top of the list for this legislative session. Now we're seeing, look, no one expected the coronavirus to come and, seize the markets and topple the normal order of business here. Where does that rank on your priority list today? Do you still have time to get a budget through and everything else and address the ethical considerations that led to some sloppy, perhaps criminal conduct from state lawmakers here? Is there any way to clean that up in the shorter time span that we have left available?
It's still critically important, and I plan to take it up and urge my colleagues in the Senate to take it up as soon as we can. That said, this is also an interesting time in that people in the political world are stepping up and demonstrating really strong ethical leadership. It doesn't mean the public won't clamor for ethical reforms, but I think it cautions that we should do this as soon as we can, but not rush it, not force it through through a series of conference calls and virtual sessions. We need to take this up in the important and sober manner in which it deserves.
So you'd like to see that handled in person in the legislature, not through some remote haphazard way?
It's important work, and it should be handled as such. Just because we have to get certain things done by May 31st or by June 30th doesn't mean we couldn't continue to legislate through the summer and the fall and move this at the earliest opportunity once it is ready and well formed.
You were the architect of the state's progressive income tax ballot question. You had advocated for that for many years before it passed last year. That question now sits and waits on the ballot for Illinois voters this November. And yet, many of the well-funded business owners and the groups that were already looking to tank that question and to sway voters to vote against it, now many of them have had to say, hang on a minute, we got to go save our businesses. We've got to go look at, you talk about people that make just north of $250,000. Many of them may be bar owners, restaurant owners. Now a lot of these different folks who have had to stare down the prospect of 6-8 weeks or longer with no customer base, with no revenue, and then 6 months later, they're going to have, Illinois is going to decide whether or not to raise their taxes pretty considerably if they're in those upper brackets. I understand people are focused on that public health crisis of this coronavirus, but the politics of it all is inevitable. It's going to come at some point. So how do the politics of this, how do the delicate side of this discussions, how does that change now that we have this surprise of the coronavirus and these businesses that are facing perhaps closing their doors?
I readily admit I have not been spending much time thinking about the politics of all this. I've been focusing on the pressing issues at hand in responding to the pandemic. I was asked this question just a couple of days ago, though, and it occurred to me that the people who are hardest hit by the pandemic are the same people who would benefit most from the fair tax. It is those individuals and small business owners who aren't earning well north of $250,000, who are worried about losing their jobs or already have lost their jobs, who have closed their businesses. Those are the people we want to give a tax cut to through the fair tax. Those lucky enough to be earning more than that are less likely to be so directly impacted by this pandemic. Most people earning $300,000 or $400,000 a year have kept their jobs or have the wherewithal to keep their businesses going through this rough time. It's the people, the 97% of people who would get a tax cut under the fair tax are the same people who are taking it in the teeth with the pandemic.
We're already seeing the first seeds of those debate points from some of the Republican groups, some of the business groups. They're saying, look, we're taking it on the chin by no fault of our own here. We're hoping that this lifeline from Congress is enough for us to keep our doors open and hopefully hire our workforces back. And some of them have even made the official request to Governor Pritzker to take the progressive tax question off the ballot. I don't know that he can single-handedly do that or by himself anyways, but the question has been posed saying, look, we've got to, we're giving relief to people who rent. We're saying no evictions. We're, don't shut off anybody's utilities. And Congress has recognized a real impact to businesses here. One economist projecting perhaps 20 million people could be filing for unemployment before this is all said and done. It sounds like you plan to march on with this plan, and we'll see how this debate moves forward. But do you have to strike a different tone, considering how many of these businesses are facing real threat right now?
Again, I don't know that there's even a mechanism to take it off the ballot. So the question will be before the voters. I really want to emphasize, most small business owners would get a tax cut from the fair tax. 97% of taxpayers, and that includes businesses. Most small businesses are just individuals who are the beneficiaries of their business operations. They get a pass-through income, and they pay the individual income tax. If they're putting $300,000 or $400,000 in their pocket in a normal year, they might pay a little more, but those aren't the folks who are really taking it on the chin here. The small business owner struggling to get by, putting $120,000 or $130,000 in a good year into her pocket, that small business owner is going to get a tax cut.
Senate President Harmon, thanks for taking a little bit of time with us in our audience here today. Stay safe, be well.
You do the same. Thank you.
And we're back in a moment. That does it for us this week. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll be right back here at the same time next Sunday. For Capital Connection, I'm Mark Maxwell.